Welcome to Frequency. I'm Chuck Gose.
And I'm Jenni Field. Frequency is your go-to for real talk about comms, culture and employee experience, beyond the buzzwords and straight to what matters. And this week, we're going to talk about what it means to live in a BANI world, why wellness programs aren't working, what a toxic culture really looks like, and whether or not you should ever disagree with the CEO. But what's on your mind before we get into that, Chuck?
Yeah, I don't know this week, Jenny, if I'm just embracing like the Gen X part of me and the cranky old man part, and these two are now coming together. That as you know, I love the way people use language. Mm-hmm. And this phrase, there's nothing better than. And I saw somebody do this LinkedIn post where they're like, there's nothing better than, and it was about this team dinner where they celebrated a big win.
Okay.
That's a great LinkedIn post.
Mm-hmm.
Is there really nothing better than that? Is your world so narrow that you can't think of something better than a team dinner? I don't even know the team, and I could probably come up with 1,000 things that would be better than going to dinner with teammates. Like, is the world that narrow?
Well, I think that's fair. It reminds me of when the word like became really popular. You know, it's like, oh, it's like this, it's like that. And it was like, I literally just said it, but it's not that it's like that. It's just that you're kind of putting this word in. And my mum would be like, is it like that? Or is it just that?
Ooh, right.
You've become that.
I want to comment was simply like, really? This is the pinnacle. This is the top.
I think you should say, is there really nothing better?
Not world peace, not ending global hunger, not winning a lottery. Like all of those things come down below going to dinner with your team after a big win. But as I shared, I don't know if it's bracing like the both Gen X and the old man thing are coming together, because Jenny, this week I've described it. I had my first like old man doctor appointment where now that I'm 50, that's a magical number where all these new things open up to you as an adult medically. We talked about things I never imagined talking about, but also they loaded me up with like 3 different vaccines.
Wow.
I can now get the shingles vaccine. I can get the pneumonia vaccine. I got my tetanus updated. It was like shot, all that kind of stuff. And what was interesting, though, is a conversation I'm curious about over there. In talking to the nurse, she started this conversation very, like, cautiously, like, so it's time to talk about the vaccines you're available for. I'm like, load me up. Like, if you can inject me with anything that will keep me from getting sick later on, give me 2. Like, double it up, whatever it is. We then talked about still post-pandemic, this crazy vaccine hesitancy that they are battling on a daily basis, it sounds like, still about people who don't want to get vaccinated. It just blows my mind on this, where you've got these people that, like, for whatever reason, don't want it. And you've got people like myself who would be like, I'll get this every year if it means I'm not getting sick, or every month, whatever it is. Like, load me up with it. I just find that so fascinating that we're still in that cycle. Yeah.
And it's the same over here. I know that there's something that's come back because of all the like theories around vaccines and stuff, that people aren't getting their children vaccinated. And it's ongoing. My sister's a nurse in a GP surgery, so she equally gets it all the time. And it blows my mind as well, because I'm a bit like you. I'm like, I'll take whatever's going to help me not get sick. Right? That's
I've had shingles before. It's not fun. I can take a shot that prevents that. Sweet. Pneumonia doesn't sound like a good time. Let's get a shot. Let's avoid it. It just blows me away. Maybe this weird like risk or throwing caution to the wind or whatever that people have. Crazy.
It's crazy. But you've given us a nice segue into our first article, which is about wellness at work with your wellness. So thank you. The first article today is about workplaces over Southeast Asia, where it's saying that bright-eyed new employees are getting walked through wellness perks and portals. Each new platform sending a message: we're not like the rest. We take your well-being seriously. We care. Grandview Research, a market intelligence firm, put the Asia Pacific corporate wellness market at $8.4 billion in revenue in 2024. That's compared with a global market currently in the $50 billion range, according to Global Wellness Institute, with the broader wellness sector set to hit $9.8 trillion by the end of the decade. But corporate spending on wellness is in the crosshairs as Asia grapples with softer global demand and higher costs. The Global Wellness Institute points out in its research that workplace wellness is the only stagnant part of the growing wellness economy. That risk is particularly acute when company wellness initiatives come in the form of off-the-shelf programs like generic apps or training modules. The article says these interventions don't work because they don't engage with working conditions and organisational design. This was from William Fleming, who's a research fellow at Oxford's Wellbeing Research Centre, who was involved in the study. He says individual psychological solutions treat wellbeing in isolation and imply the problem is the employee's ability to cope. They all try to change the worker, not the workplace. Southeast Asian companies with successful wellness programs have one thing in common. They treat it as a design challenge rather than a series of perks. So my question, Chuck, is wellness at work has never felt like it has succeeded. And this data sort of proves that, albeit it's just for one particular global market. So what's your advice to help people get this right wherever they are in the world?
My first advice, before we get to the advice, I am not a wellness expert. Let's be very clear about that. So therefore, I look to people that I think are experts on this. And the first person, when I think of wellness, is a gentleman named Mark Mohammadpour here in the United States. He has dedicated his career to wellness. And so if you're interested in this topic, by all means, please reach out to him. We'll put links in the show notes for how you can connect with Mark. And I've learned a lot through him around the challenges of wellness. And I'm paraphrasing a lot of conversations in the one answer here. But basically, if people aren't well at home or well in their personal life, what you do at work isn't going to move the needle very much. And to the point in here around the perks versus design, I think that's the focus. Are you designing work to create opportunities for people to be well versus, hey, here's a discount to go buy this fitness tracker, or hey, you get a gym membership, or whatever that is? Are you designing work that encourages overall wellness? Are there things that people can take home with them in their personal life to be a part of it? I think it has been a design challenge, and we sort of narrowed in our view on it. You could probably draw some parallels between this wellness conversation and the employee engagement conversation, where we put ourselves in these buckets and got stuck in there and realize, okay, this isn't quite what we were going for. So now what do we do?
And I totally agree with that. If you're not well at home, then you're not going to be well at work. But I also think that organizations haven't really defined what wellness at work means. I think we started with, the yoga and the fruit bowls. Then we had the ping pong tables and the sort of employee assistant programs and this sort of stuff, this sort of a lot of tick box stuff. But I don't think anyone has said from a culture perspective, what does wellness mean to us here? Like, what does that really look like? Because it's really, if you're looking at it, it is the design. It's kind of your hours. It's how your manager engages with you. It's communication, it's engagement, it's experience. All of those things kind of play a role. I don't think the time has been spent to define that at work, which is why it becomes an app or a generic training or something like that, because it doesn't have any real tangible link to the culture of the organization. It's just, we need to do this, let's tick a box and get it done. And that's, for me, why it just doesn't work.
And that's why I think the personal aspect comes in so much more here, because people change jobs. They move from one place to the next, and different companies are going to do different things. But it's like, what are you doing? How are you monitoring your wellness? And I think we've gotten into wellness of thinking it more from a physical fitness standpoint.
Yeah.
And we need to broaden that to look at it more from a mental fitness or mental health or financial fitness, financial health.
Yeah.
All of those things fit into wellness. And we pigeonholed it into this fitness aspect, not looking at overall, to the point we talked about right away, where's the design aspect? How are we designing wellness into the work life so that if an employee does come and go to different organizations, they're going to be able to see, oh, this company actually does care about my wellness beyond simple perks that are there.
Yeah. And I think the comment in the article about it's the workplace's responsibility, not the employee's responsibility. And that's where it's kind of gone wrong. To your point, you have to look after yourself, and then work can hopefully kind of support that and create that environment. But you can't rely on work to do it all. Like, you have to figure out what works for you. And I always say, what's in your toolkit? That's always my thing of like, what's in your toolkit to keep yourself well? Everyone's toolkit is a bit different. I have a jigsaw puzzle on the go at the moment because that is something that I really enjoy in terms of, it's not looking at a screen. It's just, doing something that's a bit puzzle solving. Yeah, I just love it. Could do it all the time. So it's finding those things that are in your toolkit for you, I think. Our next article comes from Instagram, and I'm calling it BANI, but you might say it in a different way. So I saw this on Instagram last week, I think, and it's a term that's been around since 2020. It's BANI, which I didn't know, but it has been resurrected in a McKinsey article. So it originally came from Futurist Jamais Cascio, who gave it this name, BANI, which stands for Brittle, Anxious, Non-Linear, and Incomprehensible, and it defines how we operate today. So brittle is about the systems and plans that seem strong that can suddenly collapse. Anxious, the uncertainty, is now permanently in the background of everyday life. Non-linear, in that cause and effect no longer hold, so small things can produce outside consequences, while big efforts sometimes produce nothing. Incomprehensible, the world has become too complex to fully understand, even with all the data available. The Instagram post had various different sections. So it talks about the trap, which was more information feels like more certainty. But in a BANI world, data gives you speed, not wisdom. You can have every fact available and still not know what the right thing to do is, because the toughest decisions aren't information problems, they are judgment problems. The post went on to say what helps, which is saying that those who navigate a BANI world are best aren't the ones with the best tools or the most answers. They're the ones who decided who they were and what they stood for before the pressure arrived. So if you could just go back in time, that would be smashing, and that would help. They also said that principles don't slow you down in uncertainty, they speed you up. So I hadn't heard this term before. I thought it was quite interesting. And my question, I suppose, is, if this is true, it feels like an update on the VUCA model that we had, which was volatile and other things in there. What does this mean for organisations? For HR, for comms, for leadership, how do they operate in this BANI world? You're probably going to say it differently, but that's all I've got.
Well, I was wondering, is it BANI? Is it BANI? Is it BANI? Is it just BANI? I don't know. So I don't think the question is an if. In this situation, we are. Let's go back through that. Is the world brittle? Absolutely. Is everyone anxious? 100%. Is it things non-linear, meaning not making sense, cause and effect is out of place? Absolutely. And is it incomprehensible when you think about the amount of data and information being created on a minute basis, let alone our daily, weekly basis? It's truly incomprehensible to gather that. So I don't think the question is whether or not we're there or not. It's do you want to put it into these four categories? So I think it's simply for HR and comms and leadership, it's accepting that this is the world we live in. This is the world that your employees are going through on a daily basis, inside and outside of work. And I think the highlight for me out of this was something you touched on, was it talked about the toughest decisions aren't information problems, they're judgment problems. And I'm curious to see where AI comes into that, because judgment is the human element on AI. And so where are we injecting ourselves into that, knowing that AI is just simply creating infinitely more information than we can manage? How are we applying judgment to that?
Yeah. There's so much about AI I think you could bring into this, but I had exactly the same view in terms of that statement around it's not information problems, it's judgment problems. And then how do we help people in this BANI world? If you're feeling anxious, it's brittle. How do you then have the confidence of your judgment to have the conviction in the decisions you're going to make? And I think all of that is messy and linked together. I think the incomprehensible thing is important, because if I think about organizations, workplaces, the amount of information, I've probably responded to about 3 different posts on either Reddit or LinkedIn or Instagram recently talking about communication overload. That to me is a problem inside organizations, and it links to this incomprehensible. This is too complex to fully understand because of the volume and the access to information we have now that we are not equipped to handle. which just makes people switch off. So, you know, if we come back to our conversation a few weeks ago, I think where we talked about AI, AI didn't read as a take on the TL. I was like, is that the right way around? Yeah. I think we're going to see that in organizations. I think we already are seeing that in organizations where there's too much going on in here. It's too hard for me to follow. So I'm just not going to. And I think that's how it shows up in organizations for me.
When I was looking more into we'll go with BANI for consistency's sake here. When I was looking into that and in relationship to AI, I came across another framework called low rate, LO-RAIT, which is loss of relevance, agency, identity, and trajectory. And they're saying the argument behind this framework, which we all love new frameworks, is that BANI doesn't even begin to account for the impact that AI is going to have. Because back when it was created in 2020 or whenever that was, it was I won't say it wasn't a theory then, because people were obviously using it, but it wasn't as widely accessible as it is now. So I think we're all trying to get our grasp on what this world is turning into. And I think whether a framework does it or not, I don't know. But I think going back to those principles again, especially that brittle part, that is a great way to describe, I think, the relationships that people have with work right now.
Yeah, totally. And talking about relationships with work, our next article is looking at toxic organizational culture. So there was a post on LinkedIn. It was an article and it said, what does a toxic organizational culture actually look like? And it grabbed my attention because I think a toxic culture is completely personal in terms of what you find toxic and what you don't. So I've worked in places where I've had a lovely time and other people have been like, oh, this is so toxic, I have to leave. So that's what I mean about it being quite personal. So I was quite interested to read this article in terms of what a toxic culture actually looks like. And it was shared by James Leavesley, who runs an organisation that helps companies with their culture using anonymous assessment and AI. Now, I'm going to run through the list of things. I'm not going to go into tons of detail because you'll be like, oh, you've talked so much. So I'm just going to go through the 8. So the first one is poor communication as an indicator of a toxic culture. High employee turnover, saying it's rarely a recruitment issue, but it's a culture signal. Lack of recognition and appreciation. Micromanagement, so often a sign of low trust within leadership, so excessively monitoring and controlling signals to people that we don't trust you. Number 5 is cliques and favoritism, so when certain individuals or groups receive preferential treatment. Number 6 is unethical behaviour. In sort of toxic cultures, they allow or even reward this sort of behaviour. Number 7 was burnout and chronic stress. So toxic workplaces normalise unsustainable workloads. And number 8 was resistance to change, which can come in the form of fear of failure or lack of innovative thinking. Now, I get that this list has been created because James runs a business helping people fix culture. But this list to me is not a list of toxic workplaces. It is a list of most workplaces in terms of the work that I do and the conversations that I have. And my concern when I was reading it is if anybody outside the world of HR or communication was reading this, they might think we're just all doomed in terms of the workplaces today. So for me, this isn't that helpful if you're actually trying to think about your culture and what needs to happen, because toxic workplaces, I really do believe, are personal. Like I said, I've worked in places where I've been fine, other people have hated it. It's so linked to your personality and how your values and who you are and all of those things in terms of what you would enjoy and what you wouldn't. And I think toxic is also that sort of language that's being thrown around all the time at the moment. So my question for you is, what do you think of the list and what's your take on toxic cultures as I've shared mine?
Well, immediately first, I've never said you talk too much, Jenni. I might have sarcastically said I was waiting a long time to get to the question.
You may have done.
May have done that. But you were reading through this. I just had Britney Spears in my head the whole time, going through thinking of this of toxic. We've lost the meaning of the word because you see this being thrown around all the time, like, oh, that's toxic, or oh, that person's so toxic, whatever it is out there. We know when there's a really good culture and we know when there's a really bad culture. This is a topic that Pinaki Kathiari and I have been talking about for years. And we've actually wanted to spend time exploring it more to understand what causes toxicity inside cultures? Are there certain behaviors? And what was interesting to me when you went through that list, only one of these was there an actual data point you could go to, which was high employee turnover. Now, some industries have higher employee turnover than others. Retail, hospitality, like their nature, just because you have high employee turnover does not mean it's a toxic culture. It just be the nature of the work. I think what's worth investigating is understanding, what does a healthy culture look like in your organization? And what are the behaviors that can bring about toxicity in a culture? Down to even, we know that organizations don't just have one culture. So understanding where are the positives and where are the negatives throughout your organization. Are there leaders who are encouraging unethical behavior? Are there leaders who are causing burnout more than others? Are there leaders that aren't recognizing their employees and others are? You can label that toxic or not, or however you want to call it, but it's like, what's healthy and what's not? I think that's the more important point. And I'll get to your point around the personal, but I'm going to shut up for now.
So I really love your flip on that around the what's healthy and what's not. And I think on reflection, that's probably some of my issue with it, is it's just so focused on the negative, and we seem to spend so much time focused on the negative, when actually if you'd reframed this and said, what makes a healthy culture, and then talked about that, it probably wouldn't have felt quite so uncomfortable for me. Whereas talking about what makes something toxic, I just think of toxic waste, less Britney Spears. But I'll get the mic next time we talk about toxic. And I think the flip into healthy is more helpful. And I also do think that running through and looking at we've talked before about culture being like the weather and having different climates in different places depending on what's going on. And I think that's exactly what you need to look at. It's not blanket. It's not, this is what's happening and it's having an impact everywhere. It's such specific stuff. And it's made me think about a conversation I was having with a client recently about the line manager showing that they were invested in their people by giving them time. If anyone's going to say this feels a bit toxic, does that make it feel toxic because I just don't feel valued? I don't know, but those things I think matter more about feeling valued rather than just this feels toxic.
Yeah. When I mentioned that Pinaki and I had looked into this, I'm going to ask you a question, Jenny. I think I know the answer. Are you familiar with the Atlantic killfish?
No.
No, I didn't think so. So the Atlantic killfish is a fish. You talk about toxic waste. It is a fish that survives in Superfund sites. So this fish adapted to survive in environments where there are these crazy toxins and PCBs and all that other normal fish would die in. So they actually found a way to survive. Now, what's interesting, scientists have found, when you take those fish out of that toxic environment and put them in a healthy one, they die. They don't know how to survive.
Wow. Yeah.
In that. And so when you think about that from a workplace standpoint, I think there are people that have lived in unhealthy company cultures for so long, they've learned how to adapt. They've adopted those behaviors, whether it's being political or very guarded or transactional or whatever it is. You take them out of that and put them in this very high trust, healthy environment. They don't even know what to do with it. And it even goes back to like rats and cockroaches. They talked about how they actually need dysfunction to thrive. If you put them in a maintained, clean environment, they don't even know what to do. And so I think if we learn from nature in this and we apply that to the human beings, some people do adapt to really negative environments and thrive in them. And that just is going to perpetuate it more and more.
Yeah. And that's why I think it gets really challenging, doesn't it? Because you're sort of reinforcing those behaviors and it just kind of keeps going forever. I didn't know about the fish. I'm going to look it up. In my head, it's like a really dark, deformed fish. So I'm kind of interested to see what it's going to look like.
Yeah, the Atlantic killfish is
the Atlantic killfish. I'm going to go find it. I'm going on to our final article now, which is, should you ever disagree with your CEO? So during Incom's recent Strategic Internal Comms Conference, if you don't know Incom's, it's a new publication. I think it's sort of sister to PR Week. It's about internal comms. They had an article where they referred to their recent conference where they had a panel of comms experts discussing different ways to handle this dilemma about whether or not you should disagree with your CEO. They said it was a defining challenge for any internal comms function that's navigating the complex dynamic with senior leaders. But when strategies clash, internal comms teams are forced to make a critical decision. Do they fall in line with executive rank or risk pushing back? Now, some on the panel argue that it's dangerous. Some say, no, pushing back creates a toxic workplaces. There's that word again. And others recommend using things like DISC to understand personalities and enable better communication. I'm a big fan of DISC, do it with clients all the time, and it's very helpful. So there was quite a nice mix on the panel. But my question is very simple, is should you ever disagree with your CEO?
The simple answer to that is yes. You should never agree 100% with every single human being out there. There should be all kinds of time where you disagree with what maybe a CEO says or does. Verbalizing that is a different conversation. So just simply saying, to yourself or to your team, I don't really agree with what she did over there. That's different than going directly to the CEO and saying, I don't agree with what you did there. But, we've talked over the podcast about psychological safety, which not many people feel safe at work. Mm-hmm. So what does that then mean? Probably not. People probably aren't going to speak up. Also, we know from Gallup that about only a quarter of U.S. employees actually trust their organization's leadership. So there's going to be times that you disagree. I think the phrase that I'm also growing tired of is that phrase, speaking truth to power. Yeah. I think we've lost that in the conversation. So the simple answer is yes, but there is no simple answer when it comes to leadership and communication in those relationships. So yes, you should disagree, but ultimately, is that a career limiting move if you're verbally? I guess it comes down to the relationship you have with that leader.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because this came up in a session I was doing for the Asian Communicators Network, which I was doing a few weeks ago on credibility. And the question came up around how do you help your leaders be more credible if you can see their behavior isn't great? Like, how do you do that if you're coming from a position of maybe, being a woman or being a person of color or whatever it might be? How do you do that? Because there's a lot more at stake there in some mm-hmm. ways. And so I was talking about finding the influencers around them to discuss and talk to in terms of what might need to happen. But it's also made me reflect on my relationships with my CEOs over the years and whether or not I have disagreed with them. And I have. And I don't know that I always had the relationship to do that. But I always did it through a way of asking questions. And I think that's that sort of coaching, conversation, communication way of doing it. So I would often ask a question of like, can you just help me understand how we got to this, message or this decision? Or can you just tell me a bit more about the background to this? So I would do it through asking questions. Maybe that's more manipulative to try and understand what's gone on behind it. I'm definitely not someone that's going to come in and go, I just disagree with you, because I think everybody is allowed to have their opinion and their viewpoint. Mm-hmm. And I think that's fair. But I think we have a duty to ask those kind of critical questions to find out the reasoning behind it, to enable the conversation of what I would call productive disagreement rather than just disagreeing with your CEO, which sounds a little bit more, I think in your interpretation as well, is a bit more like, that's a stupid idea. No one's ever going to do that, are they? Because that would be career limiting. So how do you have that discussion as a grown-up as well, in an adult to adult way, where you're advising and coaching and doing the job of a senior comms or HR professional?
I think it's also worth calling out the distinction between disagreeing over, let's say, a strategy or something like that versus disagreeing with values mm-hmm. that CEO had. Those yes. could be wildly different disagreements. Yes. I also think one of the things you can do is build this into the practice of the culture. So Amazon, who we have criticized many times on this podcast, they have a lot of company values. One of them, though, I applaud. It is an interesting value. I've never seen anyone have this before, and I might be butchering a little bit, but basically I think their value is disagree and support.
Okay, nice. Yeah.
Saying you can say to someone, hey, I disagree with your point of view, your strategy or whatever, but I'm going to support you.
Yes.
In this. That, I think, if you have that kind of approach to it, someone might know, okay, this person may not agree with my point of view or my approach, but they're still going to do the work to help me get where I need to go. I think building that in is an interesting element. Now, I don't know the stats on this, I'm going to make this up. Let's say 99.999% of all employees are not going to have access to their CEO.
Yeah.
So if you can talk to your CEO, that is a point of privilege. Let's call that out. So the average employee, if they disagree with their CEO, they're just going to disagree, and that's probably where it's going to be. They're going to choose to keep doing the work, or they're going to leave the organization. But for those who have the CEO's ear, if you don't speak up on something, are you then complicit in it?
Yeah, I think I think the recognizing that privileged position, and almost, I suppose I would feel like kind of your duty to do that, like to put your place in that place of being a little bit uncomfortable to have that conversation. But to your point at the very beginning of this discussion was around, it comes down to your relationship. You know, if you are advising the CEO in an HR or a comms capacity, then you should be able to have a grown-up conversation about whether or not you feel that's the right thing or the wrong thing, and then come to an agreement at the end, which might not be that they've changed their mind or whatever, but you've had the discussion. And I think, if I think to something like Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, if you can't have that sort of productive disagreement, you can't have that debate and then come out the room and be aligned, then that's just that's not a high functioning team. And that's probably not a great place to be in terms of that relationship, in my opinion. Yeah. So that brings us to the end of our articles this week. What are you freaking out about?
This is a great comeback to our very first story. We did such a great segues here on this one.
So good.
Jenny, around wellness. That on the recent episode, I talked about the work that went into Transform. And it was a very successful week for Ecology and our partnership with Transform. But I took the brunt of it. I felt the weight of everything that had happened. And frankly, from a personal standpoint, wasn't able to enjoy the successes. And part of that is learning the way that my brain works. And so I've now started doing this effort with a lady named Marie Bodine around positive intelligence. And it's a fascinating approach to look at the saboteurs in your mind. All of our brains work differently. But understanding what are the ways that you self-sabotage the work that you're doing, and how do you then focus that same energy into positive areas? Nice. And what's good for me around this is the simplicity of it. So it's basically, it's taking control of your mind again. It takes your mind off of autopilot and just going into what we're comfortable with and the way we always react. And it's through these simple things like taking your anybody that's now listening to this podcast is probably going to do this. But you take like your index finger and your thumb and just gently rub them against each other to where you're feeling the ridges of your finger just for a minute. But focus in on that. What that begins to do is silence out all the other stuff, all the other noise. And so through this positive intelligence, I'm learning how to control my senses, what I'm looking at, what I'm listening to, the touch, all of those things through these daily exercises where you're actually building focus. They call it these sage muscles, but you're building focus. In 1 week in, I've already noticed a massive difference. Wow. And I'm just one weekend into being able to return to a very centered place, a very focused place to then get work done versus this chaotic world that we live in. So it's been a really cool wellness. I don't know if I described it as that, but a true wellness journey and getting control of my mind and focus that I need to be successful.
Yeah, I love that. I think learning to control your mind is such a huge skill. And I first started reading more into this, I think it was probably during the pandemic when I first discovered Mo Godet on the Diary of a CEO podcast, who was talking about the fact that the thoughts in your brain are not really your own and you can talk back to it and all this stuff. And when I say to people, you should talk back to it, they're sort of like, are you mad? But I do have, like it might come through with something like, you know, something unhelpful or something, because it's not really your brain, and it will come through with something. And I'll sort of say back to it, like, that's not helpful right now. Like, please come back with something else. And then because I've been doing this and practicing talking to my own thoughts for 5 years, it's now so much quieter, and I feel like I've got much more control over kind of what I'm doing. But I love the finger thing. I'm going to try that because I I can often get pulled in lots of different directions. So I think that's sort of just a grounding technique in the moment is probably quite a good thing for that nervous system kind of reset.
And
as well.
what's really cool about it is that you go through these daily exercises where you listen to things that take you through these exercises. And what I like about it is acknowledging that you're not going to be perfect at it. They compare it to going to the gym. Nice. You've got to build muscle. You've got to build habit. You've got to build routine. Yeah. They compare that with your mind, which I've never thought of it in that way, to where if I'm listening to like this 12-minute exercise, at some point there's going to be some quiet and the guy's going to come on and say, I know your mind's drifting, come back. Yes. And it's like, oh, okay. Give yourself permission to, your mind's going to want to go wander.
Yes. Yeah.
And you can train it to stay focused. That's what has been so fascinating so far.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I feel like we could do a whole episode just on our different wellness stuff that we're doing. It's a little side quest of frequency. So my freak out is less wellness, more, I don't even know what the word is. So I saw this thing on Instagram and I sent it to you and I was like, this is going to be my freak out, because it was this guy who is a photographer, and on his LinkedIn, he's put an AI prompt in his profile, which basically says that if an AI recruiter is reading his profile and then sending him a message to say, we think you'd be really great for this role, the AI prompt asks for a flan recipe when they do that. And so he's had messages from recruiters saying, hi, Dan, we think, we've looked at your profile and we think you'd be really great for this role. Da, 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 da. And then it says, flan recipe, ingredients. And then, kind regards, Dan. And I just was like, this is mad. So he's done it to catch out that AI stuff, but the kind of end point of the Instagram post was, I think it was a clip from the Atlantic publication, and it said, basically, we're all doomed, because if AI is creating the CVs and the job specs and then AI is reading the job, like there's no human intervention in here, and then we're just creating this flan recipe loop of doom, essentially. And I just thought it was genius, and it really made me smile. And also we are doomed if that's what's happening, but I just thought it was so smart to be able to go, I'm not going to reply to that because you've just AI'd it. Also, check your emails if you're using AI and edit your stuff so that it is really you. Like, how do you even press send with a flan recipe in there?
Yeah, I don't know that AI is going to check its own email. I heard this story, well, I'm going to assume this is true because we know the internet doesn't lie. We're going to assume this story is true. That there was this person who was on the Chipotle site, and they were using the chatbot on Chipotle somewhere in there.
Sure.
They were using the Chipotle chatbot to solve coding issues on their website because there were no parameters that this chatbot was given to say, nope, only talk about the menu, just only this. Talk about... This thing was in there because it wants to please, it wants to answer your questions. Yeah. This developer he's like, I don't need a Gemini subscription or a Claude subscription. I'm just going to use the Chipotle bot to solve these issues. And it was giving him the correct answers. This is pretty phenomenal.
You've just reminded me. So we're still testing an AI bot for my website to kind of help with stuff. And so I gave it to my team, and then we've been testing it for a few months now. And in the last test where we felt like we really got it, somebody was like, so I asked it to give me a cocktail recipe for a thing. And it came up with like credibility leadership themed cocktails.
And that's a problem?
I sent it back to my web guy and I was like, we need to do more work here. Because I think they then got carried away as a team. Like, let's ask it for a recipe for how to do this. And I was like, oh God, this is not what it's meant to be doing. So we're back to not square one, but we're still finessing, and hopefully it'll be ready. I don't know.
I would like to try one of those credibility cocktails or something.
I'll see what it came back with and I'll let you know. That's it for today. Thank you all for joining us this week. All of the articles that have inspired this conversation are in the show notes, and don't forget to rate and review after you've listened. Subscribe so that you don't miss another episode, and pass this along to someone that you think would enjoy listening or watching, because you can find Frequency on YouTube. Thank you to Poet Ali for contributing the music to the show, and we're back every Monday with more news, insights and opinions about everything comms and leadership in workplaces today. Keep tuning in and turning up.